start. I don't really care.
You can start. Good.
Okay, so ethics in the supply chain, group 6. I'm Rosa Vidal.
I'm Reina Sabella.
I'm Pauline Sesente.
Okay. So let's go to the second slide. Ooh, I'm like skipping. So the objectives are business ethics, supply chain management, and ethics in the supply chain. And like we're going to talk about like, what is it, scenarios?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what is ethics? Ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos. It is defined as a system of morale, principle governed on how a person or group of people behaves. Ethics deals with the fundamental issues of practical decision-making if the actions we make are either right or wrong. Business ethics refers to implementing appropriate business policies and practices within the workplace. It is the study and examination of moral and social responsibility. Business ethics are generally seen in human resource management, sales and marketing, production, and intellectual property is to prevent things such as corporate governance, insider trading, bribery, discrimination, and corporate social responsibility. So, importance of business ethics. Knowing the business ethics is important because it assists employers to make the best ethical decision, which then can increase productivity and overall employee morale. So the need of the importance of business ethics can control any malpractice that occurred in the business, improve consumers' confidence, protect consumer rights, employers and stockholders, etc., develop good relationship with employers, stockholders, and society, and increase profitability, improves business image, creating a good functioning business. Ethical dilemmas. Ethical dilemmas is defined as a situation in which a difficult choice has to be made between two courses of action, either which entails transgressing a moral principle, as stated in the Oxford Dictionary. Therefore, there is a decision-making problem that involves two courses of actions and neither of each are clearly right and wrong. There are 4 ethical dilemmas. The first one is truth versus loyalty, which is seen as being honest or honoring your alliance with someone. The second is justice versus mercy. It's a choice of going by the book or bending the rules. Justice is being fair and mercy is being compassionate. There's mercy, myself versus community. Myself is the interest of oneself, yourself, or community is the interest of the group. Long-term versus short-term are associated with the immediate needs. What benefits satisfy now versus long-term is what's going to benefit you in the future. How would you solve ethical dilemmas? You would want to analyze the dilemma, choose the alternative that outweighs the others, the greater good versus lesser evil, find alternative solution. Ethical dilemmas are significant in the business world. We see issues that employers face and deciding whether their decision meets their moral principle. Therefore, companies implement their own regulations of proper ethical standards, which is referred to the Code of Conduct. Factors that would influence business ethics is leadership, strategy and performance, environment, corporate culture, and individual characteristics. Leaders should have the characteristics that an employee can look up to. They would need to lead ethically to motivate the employers to influence those into making the right decision. The strategy and performance that is adopted by the organization can affect on their ethical decisions. By introducing proper and ethical and legal issues can improve the employer's behavior and decisions. Strategies can implement safeguards such as the Code of Ethics or having ethical training program. The environment can impact the organizational structure of the environment is competitive, then the ethical behaviors towards employers and customers can be poor. Corporate culture is the way the company does its business. Companies can implement unethical behaviors impacting the way employers make their decisions. Individual characteristics would be shaped by social norms, cultural practices, and religious beliefs. Okay, So 5 common ethical issue categories in the workplace are unethical leadership, toxic workplace culture, discrimination, harassment, unrealistic and conflicting goals, and questionable of how a company uses their technology. So unethical leadership, a leader who is acting unethical, an example is manipulating reports, stealing money, accepting inappropriate gifts, etc. Studies have shown that 60% of unethical misconduct in the workplace are from managers. Toxic workplace cultures, company who looks the other way when workers are taking bribes, manipulating sales and data, or even pressuring employees for favors. Discrimination and harassment can occur with race, gender, disability, age, and religion. Unrealistic and conflicting goals, how employees and leaders go about reaching these goals can be unethical. And questionable use of company technology, 64% of employees visits non-work-related websites during their workday. So supply chains are one of the unethical behaviors.
Okay, so what is the supply chain? So a supply chain consists of all parties involved, directly or indirectly, in fulfilling a customer request. So from the time you would purchase an order to the time it got delivered to your door, let's say on Amazon, it's everything in between. So the supply chain includes the manufacturer, suppliers, transporters, warehouses, retailers, and the customers themselves. The supply chain includes all functions involved in receiving and fulfilling a customer request. These functions include new product development, marketing, operations, customer service, and more. Components of the supply chain. So typical supply chain stages are the customers, retailers, wholesalers, distributors, manufacturers, and suppliers. And the customer is an integral part of the supply chain. So everything revolves around the customer. Flows in the supply chain. So successful supply chains manage flows of product, information, and funds to meet customer needs in a cost-effective manner. So on the diagram below, we can see the 3 flows between the supplier stage and the customer stage. So a supply chain is dynamic and involves the constant flow of these 3 things: information, product, and the funds. The function of a supply chain involves those 3. The goal when designing a supply chain is to structure these 3 flows in a way that meets customer needs. One example that we used in class was with Apple. Apple does a great job in meeting customer needs in a lot of ways that benefit their business as well. In class, we mentioned how customers can walk into an Apple store, a secondary store such as like Verizon, or even go online to buy a product. Apple stores stock their products, so when customers come into the store, they can leave with a product right away. Orders placed online can either be delivered to your home or be picked up in an Apple store. Apple warehouses have the product in stock. Obviously, personalized and custom items take longer because they're personalized and custom orders, so they're not stocked, and the production must be done after the order is placed. So all in all, Apple does a really good job changing the flow of information and product and funds based on the customer needs and product characteristics. So the 3 objectives of a supply chain. Objective 1 is to maximize net value generated. And down here we have the supply chain surplus formula, which is really important. It's customer value minus supply chain cost. Objective 2, the higher the supply chain profitability, the more successful the supply chain. And success should be measured by a total supply chain surplus, not profits at an individual stage. And objective 3 is that the customer is the only source of revenue. The overall goal is to always grow overall supply chain surplus. So a little bit more on objective 1. The value of the final product may vary for each customer, and customer value can be estimated by the maximum amount of money that they're willing to pay for the product. The difference between the value of the product and its price remains with the customer as consumer surplus. The rest of the supply chain surplus becomes supply chain profitability. Chain profitability is the difference between the revenue generated from the customer and the overall costs across the supply chain. Objective 2, like we said, the higher the supply chain profitability, the more the successful the supply chain. For most profit-making supply chains, the supply chain surplus will be strongly correlated with profits. As we mentioned above, success should be measured in terms of supply chain surplus and not in terms of the profits at an individual stage. So basically, if but the whole process itself has a low number, then it doesn't really matter. Objective 2 emphasizes growing the supply chain surplus because it pushes all members of the supply chain towards one ultimate goal. And objective 3, for any supply chain, there's only one source of revenue, which is the customer. The customer is the only one providing positive cash flow for supply chains. All flows of information, product, or funds generate costs within the supply chain. And as an example, you could think about a car brand like Toyota we talked about in class. Supply chain decision process. So supply chain decisions may be characterized as strategic or design, planning, or operational, depending on the time horizon over which they apply. So strategy or design is the first one, and it's more long-term. It's how to structure the supply chain over the next several years, over the next quarter of a year or year, so a few months to a year. And operation can be daily or weekly or even by the minute. So strategy or design, the time frame is long, over the next several years, so very long-term. Decisions about the arrangement of the supply chain, collecting the proper resources, and what processes each stage will perform goes under this. Common strategic supply chain decisions include outsourcing supply chain functions, locations and capacities of facilities, products to be made or stored at different locations, and information systems. First, strategy or design process, you must support strategic objectives. It is expensive to reverse, and market uncertainty must be taken into account here because of the long time horizon. For number 2, planning, it is more short-term. The time frame is considered a few months to a year. It's fixed by the supply configuration from the strategic phase. Starts with the forecast of demand in the coming year. So planning decisions include production plans, inventory management policies, subcontracting, timing, and the size of market promotions. And the operations process has a very short time horizon, commonly weekly or daily, but could even range in minutes. Decisions regarding individual customer orders, the goal is to handle incoming customer orders as effectively as possible. So operation decisions include orders to inventory or production, set order due dates, making pick lists at warehouses, setting delivery schedules, and assigning an order to a particular shipment. And in this one, there's much less uncertainty because of the very short time horizon. And here we have a diagram on Apple's supply chain process. It's Apple's been ranked the company with the #1 supply chain for 8 years now, according to Gartner's supply chain top 25 list, which is pretty impressive. As we can see, it goes from sourcing, which has multiple places where they source, manufacturing, which is only in China, warehousing, distribution, and return. So distribution could be in an online store, retail stores, direct sales force, wholesalers, retailers, or network carriers. Like we used earlier, we talked about a little bit in one of our earlier slides, and they are very successful because they base their business off of customer needs and wants.
So the ethical supply chain is a practice that focuses on the need of corporate and social responsibility. It aims to work, produce, and treat and lead the way their employers and environment in an ethical way. So the answer to the obvious question of whether or not you need an ethical supply chain is yes. There are many key elements that are taken into account when it comes to practicing ethics in a supply chain. If these elements are implemented correctly, the result will be a social and responsible process for the business that is done around the world. It also results in long-term loyalty and improvement in customer service. In today's world, people even tend to seek out brands that are practicing ethics and sustainability. One of the important parts of having an ethical supply chain includes the bullets shown on this slide. There is an obvious social responsibility when it comes to ethics in a supply chain and making sure that the environment and human rights are being handled in the best way possible to provide fair working conditions and sustainable practices. There are some important questions that consumers might have regarding how a business is practicing ethics. These questions must be taken into consideration and evaluated in order to ensure that the company is satisfied with every aspect of the process, that if there is an ethical dilemma, that there is protocol to recognize and fix the problem. As a way of showing sustainability and ethical practices, Starbucks is committed to 100% sustainability source coffee. The coffee and farmer equity practices is a system that they use to maximize their sustainability. The elements that Starbucks focuses on in the cafe system are quality, economic transparency, social responsibility, and environmental leadership. Their coffee planting, harvesting, processing, and purchasing is done ethically as well, and they use a third-party source to ensure that their sourcing is as ethical as possible. Each of 98.5% of their suppliers' names and addresses on their website and update it quarterly. This allows anyone to verify and confirm that they are living up to the standards that are set by the company. They also have a goal to use 100% recycled or sustainable materials by 2030. The fashion industry is already seen as problematic due to fast fashion and unethically sourced materials, and H&M decided to make their own reputation and hope their other retailers follow in their positive example. And finally, the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group has a social responsibility section on its website, which explains the policies of ethical sourcing and outlines the code of conduct that is expected for suppliers to follow. They use third-party groups like the UN Human Development Index to evaluate ethics and quality of the companies they source from. Their corporate social responsibility report allows consumers to look into the ethical practices of the company and become informed about what they're doing.
So here are some multiple choices questions. The first one is job discrimination occurs when A, an employment decision in some way harms or disadvantages an employer or job applicant. B, the decision rests on prejudice, false stereotypes, or assumptions that the group in the question is in some way inferior and thus does not deserve equal treatment. C, A and B. D, an employer finds the coworker attire to be hideous. It's deciding to freeze. Okay. So multiple choice question 2. Who are the main source of revenue for supply chains? A, suppliers, B, customers, C, business owners, or D, manufacturers? And then question 3. What is one thing that ethics in the supply chain does not do? A, environmental consideration. B, incorporation of social and human rights and practices. C, make sure that everyone is doing production work correctly. Or D, focus on the need for corporate social responsibility. So here are the answers. Hopefully you got them right. And here is our reference. Thank you so much for listening. And that's it.